In the heart of the Hollywood Hills, nestled among the trees and far from the bustling city, stood Ingrid Bergman's private retreat, a place she often escaped to for solitude and reflection, away from the glare of fame. Yet, in the years after her death, the house became known for something far more unsettling than the life of a screen legend. Those who have visited, even for brief moments, speak of a strange energy that lingers in the air, something unexplainable, yet palpable. It's not just the remnants of a bygone era, but something far more haunting. Visitors describe feeling an inexplicable chill that seems to move through the rooms, even on warm summer days. Cold spots would appear seemingly out of nowhere, chilling people to the bone despite the heat. It was as though the house had its own weather system, one that refused to be understood. More unsettling still are the whispers of invisible touches, gentle, almost affectionate at times, as if someone unseen were brushing against your arm or shoulder. It would always happen when you least expected it, during quiet moments, when you're alone in one of the rooms that once held the actress's presence. Those who have experienced these touches can't help but feel an eerie sensation, like being watched by unseen eyes. The sense of being observed, even when no one is around, lingers long after you leave. Some claim that Ingrid's spirit is still tethered to the house, unable to leave its walls. Her presence, whether in a form of warmth or a chilling cold, lingers in the quiet corners of the house. The faint scent of perfume sometimes fills the rooms, evoking memories of her time spent there. A shadow, just a flicker in the corner of your eye, might be seen in a doorway or near the windows, a reminder that the house, while beautiful, holds something far more unsettling within. For those who remain in the house long enough, the stories often become harder to ignore. The sense of peace Ingrid Bergman sought in the house now seems to coexist with the inexplicable energies that surround it. Some say it's the restless spirits of old Hollywood, unable to move on, while others believe it's Ingrid herself, still watching over the place she once called her sanctuary. Whether it's the house that holds the secrets or the lingering soul of an icon, the unsettling energy remains, leaving everyone who steps through the door with a lingering question. Is it just the echoes of the past or something more? As the years passed, the whispers about Ingrid Bergman's house only grew louder. More and more people who ventured into the Hollywood Hills found themselves drawn to the secluded home, unable to resist the pull of its eerie reputation. Some came out of curiosity, eager to witness the strange occurrences for themselves, while others, more reluctant, felt a compelling need to understand what lay beneath the surface. One such visitor was a well-known Hollywood screenwriter, David Blake, who had long been fascinated by the mysteries of old Hollywood. When he arrived at Ingrid's former retreat, the house greeted him with an unnerving stillness. He could feel the weight of the past pressing in on him, almost like the house itself was watching his every move. He took a slow walk through the living room, his fingers grazing the edge of a dust-covered mantel. The air was thick, heavy, as if the house had been waiting for someone to unlock its secrets. As David moved deeper into the house, it wasn't just the cold spots or the faint whispers. He noticed there was something more. The walls seemed to hum with a quiet energy, as if they were alive with stories waiting to be told. In the study, where Ingrid had once written her letters and reflected on her films, David saw something that made his heart race. On the desk, there was a notebook, old, its pages yellowed with age, but strangely, it wasn't completely empty. A single sentence was written on the last page, as if someone had scrawled it recently. "They are watching me." The chill that crept up his spine was unmistakable. He turned the page, desperate to find more, but there was nothing else. The house seemed to sigh, as if disappointed by his search, and the air grew heavier, thick with the sensation that he was no longer alone. A shadow seemed to move just out of sight, and the faintest sound, like a soft breath, brushed past him. David left the study and walked into the hallway, where the paintings of Ingrid, still hanging in their old, ornate frames, stared down at him with lifelike intensity. He could feel their gaze, as if they were silently observing his every move. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A figure barely there, just a hint of movement in the reflection of the hallway mirror. It was Ingrid. At least it looked like her. but the figure didn't quite match the warmth of her image on the screen. There was something hollow in the eyes, something lost. David moved closer to the mirror, his breath shallow, but the figure vanished before he could get a better look. The mirror was empty. He felt his pulse quicken, but when he turned back, the feeling of being watched intensified this time, from every corner of the house. It wasn't just a haunting. It was a presence, alive, restless, desperate to communicate. But how? He was about to leave when he heard a low, mournful sigh, coming from somewhere deep within the house. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't just the creaking of old wood. It sounded almost like a cry, a sound so soft and sorrowful it sent a shiver down his spine. David took a deep breath and followed the sound, deeper into the heart of the house. In the back room, where Ingrid had often spent hours alone, writing or contemplating, he found something that chilled him to the core. The floorboards in the corner of the room were slightly ajar, a hidden compartment beneath them. He knelt down, heart racing, and lifted the boards. Inside was an old, ornate box, covered in dust, and when he opened it, he found a collection of letters, dozens of them. Handwritten notes, each signed with a name he recognized. Her former co-stars, directors, friends. But there was something wrong. The letters weren't love notes or fan letters. They were desperate pleas for help, written in a frantic, panicked hand. One of them, dated just weeks before Ingrid's death, was particularly unsettling. "I am not alone here," it read. "They watch me, and they won't let me leave." David's blood ran cold. He slammed the box shut, and the moment his hands made contact with it, the temperature in the room plummeted. His breath fogged in the air, and the unmistakable scent of perfume filled his nostrils, sweet, heavy, almost suffocating. But it wasn't the scent of Ingrid's favorite perfume. This was something different, something older, something that didn't belong in the house. David stumbled back, realizing too late that he had awakened something far darker than he had ever imagined. The house groaned, the walls creaked, and suddenly, the feeling of being watched was unbearable. He turned to run, but the door to the hallway slammed shut on its own. The house seemed alive, its every corner pulsating with an energy that threatened to consume him. Then, in the corner of the room, a shadow appeared, distinct and clear this time. Ingrid's figure. But there was nothing warm in her expression. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terror that David couldn't understand, and her lips whispered words he couldn't hear. A gust of wind slammed through the house, blowing out the lights, and in the darkness, he heard one final, chilling whisper, "Get out." Before it's too late, the house seemed to exhale, a long, drawn-out sigh, and for the first time, David understood. He wasn't just dealing with the restless spirit of an actress, there was something more here. Something ancient, something that had taken hold of Ingrid and refused to let her go. He bolted for the door, desperate to escape, but the house itself seemed to fight him every step of the way. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. David's heart hammered in his chest as he reached for the door, his fingers trembling. It felt as though the house itself was pulling him back, a suffocating force that refused to let him leave. The walls closed in around him, the shadows stretching unnaturally as if they had a mind of their own. The scent of that strange perfume grew stronger, filling the room with an oppressive sweetness that seemed to cloud his thoughts. With every step, he could feel the house tightening its grip on him. His legs felt heavier, as if invisible hands were weighing him down, urging him to stay. The whispers, low and unintelligible, swirled around him like a chant, filling his ears with the sound of something ancient and desperate. Ingrid's voice, or what sounded like her voice, broke through the murmurs. Faint but unmistakable, "You can't leave. You can't leave me alone." His pulse raced. The door, only a few steps away, suddenly seemed miles out of reach. He grabbed the handle and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. It felt as though the door itself had become part of the house, as though it were locked from the other side by something far more powerful than simple wood and metal. Then, from behind him, a sound that made his blood freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing across the hardwood floor. They were heavy, the kind of footsteps that sent a chill up your spine, as though someone or something was following him, just out of sight. He spun around, but there was nothing there, only the darkened hallway stretching endlessly into the unknown. The whispers grew louder now, filling the entire room, suffocating him with their urgency. He tried to ignore them, tried to focus on the door, but his eyes kept being drawn to the shadow at the end of the hallway. It was shifting, undulating, as if it were alive. The outline of a figure took shape, a woman's silhouette, tall and elegant, but distorted, her features unclear, obscured by the darkness. It was Ingrid, or at least it looked like her, but something was wrong. Her eyes were wide with terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. And then, just as quickly as she appeared, she vanished into the shadows. David's breath caught in his throat. No, this was different. He had felt her presence before, but now, it was as if something else had taken hold of her. Something darker, something more sinister. He had always believed that spirits were mere echoes of the past, trapped by unresolved emotions. But what was in that house, it wasn't just an echo. It was a force, something that had taken root, and it was growing stronger. The air around him seemed to thicken, and the temperature dropped even further. His body trembled with the cold, but his mind was racing. What had Ingrid discovered? What had she been trying to escape from? The letters in the hidden compartment, they hadn't just been written by her. The other names, the desperate pleas, they were connected. And the warning she had left him, the whisper to get out, was not just for him. It was for anyone who came too close to the truth. The house creaked ominously as though it were coming alive, each groan of the floorboards a reminder that it was not just a home, it was something more. Prison. And Ingrid was its captive. David's eyes darted back to the hallway, his instincts screaming at him to leave. But just as he turned to the door again, something made him stop. A soft, melodic hum, faint but unmistakable, drifted through the air, echoing from the back of the house. It was hauntingly beautiful, a lullaby that seemed to pull at his very soul. It was Ingrid's voice, but it wasn't like anything he had heard before. It wasn't the clear, confident voice of the actress he knew from her films. It was fragile, almost broken, filled with a longing that cut through him. The hum seemed to beckon him, calling him deeper into the house, into the shadows. David stood frozen, torn between the overwhelming urge to escape and the inexplicable pull toward the sound. His body moved without his consent, his feet carrying him down the darkened hallway, drawn to the source of the humming. As he walked, the temperature plummeted further, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. "Don't go, don't listen," they seemed to say, but it was too late. The humming had already reached a crescendo, and David felt as though it was no longer just a voice, there was something else there. Something ancient, something that had been waiting. At the end of the hallway, he reached a door, just an ordinary wooden door, slightly ajar. The humming was louder now, vibrating the walls around him. He pushed the door open slowly, cautiously, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. What he saw inside took his breath away. The room was unlike anything he had seen before in the house. It wasn't a part of the house he recognized, but it seemed to have always been there, hidden in plain sight. The walls were covered in strange symbols, markings that looked almost like ancient runes, as if the house itself were etched with dark secrets. In the center of the room was an ornate mirror, its surface cracked and stained with age. But it wasn't the mirror that caught his attention. It was the figure standing before it. Ingrid, but not as he had known her. Her body was thin, gaunt, her hair wild and unkempt, her eyes wide and hollow. She was staring into the cracked mirror, her hands pressed flat against its surface, as if she were trying to pull herself out. But there was something else in the reflection, something that wasn't her. The shadow of a man, tall and looming, stood behind her, his face obscured by darkness. David's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just a haunting, it was a curse. David's heart raced as he stood frozen in the doorway, staring at Ingrid's broken reflection in the mirror. Her eyes, wide with fear, never left the glass, and her hands pressed against it as if she were trying to break free. But there was something else there, something far darker, standing behind her an impossibly tall figure, its face hidden in shadow. The humming stopped abruptly, and the silence in the room was deafening. David's throat tightened, and a cold sweat broke out on his brow. It wasn't just Ingrid in that mirror. It was as though the very essence of the house had come alive, manifesting in the form of the dark figure. He could feel its presence, like a weight pressing down on him, suffocating him with its power. Ingrid's voice, hoarse and trembling, broke the silence. "Help me. It won't let me go." Her words were barely a whisper, but they cut through him like a knife. David took a step forward, his legs shaking beneath him. "Ingrid," he whispered, reaching out instinctively. But as his fingers neared the mirror, the figure behind her seemed to shift. Its outline became clearer, its form more defined, and in that moment, David realized what it was. It wasn't human. The figure's limbs stretched unnaturally long, its eyes glowing a faint, malevolent red. It was something ancient, something not bound by the laws of the living or the dead. It was the force that had claimed Ingrid, the dark presence that had held her captive within the house. "Don't," Ingrid's voice faltered, and the figure's shadow reached toward her. The dark shape moved with a terrifying fluidity, wrapping around her like tendrils of smoke. Ingrid screamed, but the sound was muffled, as though it were being swallowed by the house itself. David's instincts screamed at him to run, but some unseen force held him in place. He couldn't look away. He couldn't tear his gaze from the mirror. The figure was pulling Ingrid into the glass, dragging her deeper into the reflection, until she was nothing more than a whispering shadow. Suddenly, the room grew colder still, the temperature plunging into an unnatural chill. The walls seemed to pulse, as if the house itself were alive, feeding off the terror that hung in the air. David's breath came in ragged gasps, and his mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to break this curse. He stepped closer to the mirror, his hand trembling as he reached out. The figure, sensing his movement, turned its gaze toward him, those glowing red eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made him stagger back. But it wasn't just the figure watching him. The house itself seemed to watch, its very walls closing in around him, trapping him in a nightmare from which there was no escape. David's fingers brushed the surface of the mirror. It was cold, colder than ice, and as soon as his skin made contact, the room seemed to twist and shift. The house groaned as though in pain, and the walls buckled, distorting like a funhouse mirror. A loud cracking sound echoed through the room as the mirror began to splinter, the glass breaking into hundreds of pieces that floated midair, suspended by some unseen force. In that instant, the figure lunged forward, its long, twisted limbs reaching for David. Time seemed to slow as he stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest, his body frozen in terror. But just as the figure's hands closed in on him, Ingrid's voice broke through the chaos. "You have to leave. Now." Her voice was filled with urgency, and for the first time, there was clarity in her words. The reflection of the house, the curse, the dark force, it was all collapsing around him, trying to pull him in. Ingrid's image flickered in the broken shards of the mirror, her face filled with grief and regret. David's legs moved instinctively. He turned and ran, his breath short and panicked. The house seemed to fight him every step of the way, the air thick and suffocating, as though it didn't want him to escape. But he kept moving, his hands brushing against the walls for support as the house groaned and trembled around him. Finally, he reached the front door. With one last, desperate push, he yanked it open and stumbled out into the cool night air. The chill that had gripped him in the house seemed to lift, and he gasped for breath, the weight of the curse lifting off his shoulders. But as he turned to look back, he saw a shadow moving in the window, Ingrid's figure once again staring out at him, her face a mixture of relief and sorrow. The house stood silent, its secrets once again locked behind its walls. David never spoke of what he saw that night. He left the Hollywood Hills the next morning, never returning to the house. But every so often, in the quiet moments of his life, he would hear the hum again, faint but unmistakable, carried on the wind, calling him back to that cursed place. And somewhere, deep within the house, Ingrid's whisper still echoed, trapped in the mirror. You can never truly leave. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Any coincidences with real events or characters are accidental.